We are so glad you decided to join us this morning for Sunday school. This morning we're going to talk about Easter Sunday. I know it's not Easter Sunday yet, but it's probably felt like Easter for a while. If you've been in a grocery store, you've seen all of the Easter candy, the bunnies, the big baskets, all of it. And it's been there forever. And of course, with everything going on, it's felt like March lasted forever. So I'm sure we're all feeling the Easter spirit as we go into grocery stores and things. And I particularly love Easter. I love spring. I was born on Easter Sunday, and it's never been Easter Sunday since then. And then I love like the Starburst jelly beans. They only come out around Easter, so if you haven't had one, you need to go get some and let me know if you love them, because it's going to be your new favorite candy, I'm sure. And I just love Easter and the fact that I get to see family. I always loved like getting a new Easter dress and dressing up and taking pictures, and then having a huge dinner with lots of friends and family present. And Easter's just been one of my favorite times, and like literally my favorite day, one of my favorite days of my entire life was an Easter Sunday when I lived in Sydney, Australia. And that morning, like my friends and I, we got up and went to Hillsong for the service, and then we spent the rest of the day at our favorite beach, and it was just a really good day, like perfect weather, hanging out at the beach. And then we cooked a huge American style Easter dinner for all of our friends there, and we just had a really awesome time, and it's one of my absolute favorite days. And I want you to think about Easter in your life, like do you have good memories of Easter? And maybe going on an Easter egg hunt, or seeing the Easter bunny and bringing his basket, or if you had to sit in his lap to take a picture, or you know, taking pictures with your family. Like for some of us, those are really awesome times, and then for some of us, those are not awesome times. Like if you were a kid who was scared to sit in the Easter bunny's lap, or maybe your family doesn't get together for Easter, or you didn't grow up going to church Easter Sunday, you may not understand like all of what Easter entails. But a lot of Easter seems like it's about the Easter bunny and these eggs and all of these things, but in fact it's actually about Jesus rising from the dead. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So in this lesson, one of the things we were going to do, planning on doing, is talking to you about how Easter can be a scary time, and how there can be fear in our lives even in the midst of Easter. And probably a few months ago, it seemed like that was going to be a difficult task to tie in. And now, sitting here today, thinking that there's anxiety during the time of Easter does not seem hard, given the global pandemic that we are experiencing. So I'm not going to even take time to convince you that there can be fear during Easter. Even if you were afraid of the Easter bunny, or even if your family does not have close connections and ties and get together during Easter, like all of us are experiencing fear and anxiety in some way right now during this pandemic. So take it as you will that there is fear during Easter seasons for some people. And we already can see how fear can determine the direction of our lives and what we do, and how fear can really start to take over our lives and take over our mind. I know that in a lot of the Sunday school classes and small groups that we've been talking about, fear has been a huge topic. And, you know, checking in on people, making sure like, how's your anxiety? How are you feeling with what's going on in the world right now? And not only like it's fear about a pandemic and getting sick, and fear for the doctors and nurses and pharmacists and grocery store workers and truck drivers and all of the people who are on the front lines of this really being exposed to the virus, but there's fear of like death of a loved one who's immunocompromised, like getting this virus, or death of our friends, and things that are going on like that are fighting the virus. Like it's okay to be afraid of those things. Like we totally understand that there's a lot of fear going on right now, but even if like that's not a fear for you, then maybe it can be like fear of, you know, going to college, or getting into college, or not making the team that you want. Like all of these things can be huge fears in our lives, even right now, as we don't really know what the future is going to look like, and we can be afraid of like losing our job, or our parents losing our job, or what what this is going to look like in the future. Like, we totally understand that there's a lot of fear going on right now and how it can determine the directions our lives are going. Like, we might not make decisions based on fear, or we might avoid like people and conversations, and right now we're avoiding grocery stores and going outside because of fear. And it can be easy to just numb the fear with video games and music and scrolling on our phone, or just talking to our friends on FaceTime and like not actually addressing fear and thinking about it. But obviously, fear right now is a huge factor in our lives, and it can be overtaking our minds and fueling our thoughts and actions. And there's other things we can be afraid of like truly being ourselves and letting people see who we are, or being afraid of like our reputation being ruined, or being afraid of like the dream of going to college and not getting into that one that we wanted to. And especially right now with like, you didn't get to take that last ACT, or your GPA isn't that great, or you're worried about your AP classes. Like, there's tons of things to be afraid of right now. And all of that to say that an easy connection of all of our fears is the fear of death. And even if it's not physical death from COVID-19, like, there is other fear that comes, like fear of death in a relationship, just like losing a friend and that relationship ending, or the death of a dream by not getting into the college we want to get into and not getting the job we want, or not making the baseball team. Like, all of these things come down to the fear of something ending and it being final. And death and these fears can seem final, but that is exactly where Easter comes in. Right in the middle of fear and death is when we see Jesus rising again. So if you've ever been around Easter, heard of Easter, grown up in the church, you have probably heard and know that this holiday is not just about Easter bunnies and eggs and hunting. It's about Jesus rising from the dead, and it's a celebratory time for Christians, one of the most celebrated times in a Christian's life. And when Jesus went to the cross, no one was expecting him to rise from the dead. He'd been telling people that, and they had a good grasp on what that actually was going to look like. And today we're going to talk about Paul and how Easter changed his life. So if you've been in church, you probably know who Paul is. He's one of the most famous Christians in history. When he became a Jesus follower, previous to that, he had been a persecutor of Christians. He was actually killing Christians. He was threatening them. And people knew him as this persecutor. And then he meets Jesus, who used to be dead, but was not dead anymore. And it changed everything about his life. And he turns from this guy who hated Christians into one of the greatest missionaries of all times. He wrote tons of the book in the New Testament. And he is just an extraordinary guy that we really listen to as we read the Bible. And his life, he became imprisoned, he was threatened, he was beaten. He spent this time in jail and was still writing letters, still proclaiming the gospel to the people in the jail. And he was living this life constantly in danger and had a real reason to be afraid of death and dying. But despite all of that, we can see in these letters that Paul wrote that he was not afraid of death. And he writes this letter to the church in Corinth, and he says, "Death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting?" And this is 1 Corinthians 15:55. And it's like Paul is taunting this idea of death and telling this church, are you going to really be afraid of death? Where is its victory? Where is the sting that it has in our lives? We don't have to be afraid of this, because when Jesus died and rose again, he defeated death. And because of the resurrection, we no longer have to let death defeat us. And it's this power that death seems like it has over our relationships and reputations and future and hope in our actual physical body, that's gone away by what Jesus did on Easter. It doesn't have this power over us that it used to have, and we don't have to fear any kind of death, because Jesus destroyed death once and for all when he was on the cross. And as Jesus hung on the cross and was in the tomb and then rises again later, we can see that death is defeated for all time. And that means for us, our anxiety and our fear and the things that we deal with, we don't have to, because Jesus defeated death and all of that. And if Jesus defeated death and he overcame all of this, then we don't have to live in fear, just as Paul didn't live in fear. This is what he was trying to tell us, is that we no longer have to fear death. We no longer have to fear these things in our lives because they don't have the ultimate say. Jesus does. And it really seems like Paul didn't fear anything he encountered, and he eventually died for his faith because he knows that we have the same power in us. So Jesus can defeat death. He can defeat these things that you're afraid of too. So fear is going to try to convince you that it has the final word, that at the end of the day, it's going to win, you're going to lose, that you're not going to be good enough, you're not going to find your purpose, your life isn't going to be worth it. And those are all lies. And I understand how fear can overtake your life. Like, I've seen it in tons of people right now. I've felt it right now and how I make decisions. And we're not trying to tell you that like fear is going to completely go away for the rest of your life if you're a Jesus follower, because that's not true. Like, I've been a Jesus follower for a long time and I still deal with fear. But what we do want to tell you is that you can continue living your life afraid and doing things anyway, doing things afraid because you have the power of Jesus in you. It doesn't have to overtake all of your thoughts and all of your lives and hold you captive and paralyzed. But fear, though it's not going to go away, and though it is justified, obviously, in a global pandemic, fear doesn't have to be the end. Fear doesn't have to control your thoughts and your minds and your actions, because you have Jesus who lives in you. And we know that because in Romans 8:11, Paul writes, the Spirit of God who raised Jesus from the dead lives in you. So Paul's saying the same power that defeated death 2,000 years ago when Jesus rose from the dead is actually living inside of people who believe in Jesus today. And we can see like how Paul can live freely living in that truth, and both of us, me and you, can embrace that today, as that Easter's coming. Jesus already rose from the grave. Like, we can live during this time like joyous and happy, and not worrying about these things in the world, because we have Jesus who lives in us. And it's not like the pandemic is going to end because Jesus lives in us, but what's going to happen is that we're going to turn our attention from the negative and the fear and the news into celebrating the good things that are happening and seeing the good and the joy and where is God in these moments, and choosing to put away the fear and things that are like we are worried about, and instead we're going to put on all of the good things that God is doing, and we're going to really focus our mind on those things instead of being afraid. So if you have faith in Jesus, this power that brought Jesus back to life living in you, is going to look like not letting fear control you. So that's going to look a lot of different ways for a lot of different people. If you feel like being vulnerable today, we would love to hear from you. You can post or DM us or talk about it in your small group conversations, like in your group chats, about things that are holding you back. So answer this question: where have you been letting fear hold you back right now? Is it in your relationships? Is it dreaming big for your future? Is it going to college? Is it dealing with mental health concerns like anxiety and depression that you haven't told anyone about? Is it worrying about what's going to change in your life if you really go all in for Jesus and if you become a Jesus follower and if you really start living that way? Are you worried about what's going to change, what has to change, what you're going to have to put away to move forward in that next step? So we want you to hear today that fear doesn't have to paralyze you. And if you've been afraid of forgiving someone or apologizing or talking to your parents or talking to a counselor or seeing a doctor or telling your friends things you've never told them, or completely picking a new friend group because they're not good for you, or asking the really tough questions about Christianity, we want you to do that today. And we want you to not live afraid and to continue to be the light and to pour out Jesus into the world right now. And so we want to open up this conversation to talk about how we are not going to live afraid. So we'd love to hear from you today. And you can respond to our stories or anything that you see today. And we just want you to know that we are so proud of you and that we love you. And during this time, we're here for you, and that we are going to continue this conversation next week, and that today you can live like in the power of the cross, what Jesus did for you in his resurrection, and put off this fear and anxiety and move fully into living a free life with Jesus. So that's all we have for you today. Please let us know what you think and your thoughts. We want to hear from you. Have a good day.
I'm a child.